TNC, Original African Stories. Listener discretion is advised as this podcast may contain violence or strong language.
Previously on Aso Ebi.
This one that you are dressed formally to visit a friend on a Monday morning.
She lightly tapped his stomach.
We need to do something about this your pot belly. It's getting a bit too big for my sensibilities.
That skirt is too tight, oh.
Very good. Moyeni, right? I'll be at Southern Sun this evening. That's my number and the room number in case you can't reach me.
Hey, God bless you, doctor. Doctor, I know say you be good person. And my pikin husband don't tell me say you never get husband. As you dey wait the better man so, we I know say God go must give you. You fit find the one way go give you pikin first.
I think I want a baby. She heard herself say as she playfully traced the letters of the word baby on his arm. Where are you going?
Home?
Fuck you, Charles. Never again. Nah, I'm done. I actually want a baby. I want a baby.
Hey, you.
Are you still on the island? Can you come to mine, please? Bami.
I have company.
Oh. Who?
I met this babe.
It was another Saturday, but not just any other Saturday. It was the 10th of March. You know what that means, right? You don't? Party time! Party time! On this day, the massive space between the main gate and the front door of the Gbadebo mansion was home to a large white tent filled with music, food, and chatter, all in favor of Jayola Gbadebo's 39th birthday. The sun was beginning to set, but as we take you to join this OWAMBEE, it doesn't quite look like the party is ending anytime soon. Jayola pulled his wife towards him as she passed by in her green and silver lace Iran buba and gele that perfectly matched his own lace agbada and fila. He danced around her while she smiled shyly until she eventually succumbed and started to dance in response. He held his bottle of beer over her head and chanted her name as she gyrated her way towards the ground to the music from the band, obeying his insistent orders to komole. She laughed as Jayola set aside his beer, put out a wad of 500 naira notes, and began to throw them at her to the encouragement of onlookers who were now clapping for her. Moini beamed despite herself and her observations of him and the suspicious woman from days before. She was very proud to see her 6 weeks of planning come together perfectly. She was pleased at the excitement in every step her husband took and every gesture he made. One would think he was previously unaware of his birthday party, with the grin that sat comfortably on his face. Moini spun around twice as the band came to the end of their song and kissed Jayola on his cheek before disappearing into the crowd and finally escaping from the jubilation contained in that tent. She stopped close to the front door of the house and bent to take off her shoes. Her feet were tired of being imprisoned and she still had a lot of walking around to do. Her Oleku wrapper was starting to feel loose and she needed to touch up her makeup before returning to the party. Sweat had really adjusted it for her. She scanned around for her gate man and it seemed like she was the only person outside the tent. She turned, her shoes in hand, and into the house.
Nini.
She jumped when she heard the familiar voice so close that it felt like it had come from within her.
What the hell, Zino? You scared me. What are you doing here?
The frown on her face did not stop him from smiling. He leaned in for a hug, but she stepped backwards.
I was invited.
She recognized that smile. It was the one he had the last time she saw him. The one he had on years ago when she stormed out of his student room and cut him off from her life. It was not genuine. It was laced with jealousy and anger. She sighed and put her feet back into her shoes. She grabbed his wrist and they walked quickly, her heels barely touching the ground, to the back of the house. She stopped when they reached the front of the pool house and stood underneath the floodlights. Positive they were alone, she folded her hands in front of her chest and asked calmly,
Zino, what do you want from me? Are you stalking me now?
His smile faded, but she could still see its imprint. He stared at her as if he was searching for something on her face.
Zino!
Why haven't you picked any of my calls?
He asked, smiling again. She was about to respond, but he continued.
Why did you run off to get married the moment we had a small misunderstanding? Like, more importantly, why did you run off to get married at 19? 19?
His Oyibo face had turned red, and she was left without words. Perhaps it was indeed time to finally sit with him and have the conversation that she had dreaded, and was in fact convinced that she had escaped forever. She looked away from his clear brown eyes and turned to focus her attention on opening the door to the pool house. She had barely turned the handle when the door opened on its own.
Welcome, madam.
Her gate man said, bowing as he stepped out and stood about 6 inches away from her.
Jeddah, is this your post? Come on, get to the main gate, my friend.
She said, almost pushing him while he slowly stepped away from her. The door opened again, and a dark-skinned young lady that she did not recognize stepped out. Her thick braids peered out from underneath her shabbily tied scarf, and the buttons of her pale, faded yellow shirt were mismatched from the corresponding holes. She looked at the young lady and laughed when she realized what their not-so-sacred pool house had just witnessed. Looks like someone was having himself a good time.
Jeddah!
She put her hands on her waist.
Hi, madam, please. See, I take God Almighty and embrace Allah, beg you, not tell Oga, I beg. Hey, madam, I swear I no go do am again. One like tell lie, madam, I beg. You see, now because I dey happy for Oga, na him make body they do me like this. Hey, madam,
his hands were on his head, and his face was a steady, empathetic expressions contorting this way and that as he begged for her silence. The girl had started to sob, with her knees attaching her to the coarse gravel, as though she was praying to Moini. Moini shook her head. She glanced at Zino, who was now smiling, moved towards Jeddah and pulled his ears.
No respect. Just this one time, I no go tell Oga. No do am again. Oh yeah, Alele, to your post, my friend.
Away from the comolaying guests, jubilating friends, fornicating gate men, and other assorted OWAMBEE real-life vignettes, Anita, closely followed by Jayola, escapes into the near solitude of the kitchen. From the look on their faces, it seems like it's time for some serious discussions. Could this be the beginning of, you know what? Why don't you find out for yourselves? Jayola shut the kitchen door behind them after making sure they were alone and pulled out a stool for Anita. She saw the glaring unease on his face.
Please, why have you disrupted my faji?
She asked as she sat down. He opened the fridge and took out 2 cans of beer.
I haven't seen Bami. Is he here?
Jayola asked, fidgeting with the tab of the can. She snatched the can from him.
Yeah, my car has issues, so he picked me up.
I don't know why you won't give him a chance, He's the only stable man in your life,
She raised her left eyebrow, questioning how he knew what he was talking about. In recent years, she had noticed his lack of interest in her personal life. She had decided to understand his unspoken reasons and had accepted them, just as she had accepted that their home was not and would never be entirely open to her. He and her had too much history, and no matter how close she came to Mo, that history would never be erased. He winked at her.
So, is that why you took me away from the lovely man that was entertaining me?
She feigned irritation. He pulled out another chair and sat facing her. He did not believe in inviting a third person into his marriage, but he had fiddled with talking to his wife's best friend for a long time and decided that there was no harm in asking for her help, especially from Anita. He was 1 year closer to the big 40, and despite the fact that he still loved his wife's company, their home felt empty. In the first 3 years of their marriage, he did not want children solely because his wife was still in full-time education. But it was now 5 years since she graduated and they moved back home.
Hello, Jayola.
He shook his head and took a sip of his beer.
Mo and I will have been married for 8 years in a few months.
Anita sat back and folded her arms.
So this is where he's heading. This is probably the reason he had called my phone at odd hours in the past weeks and not anything more dubious.
I need to know that we are okay. At least I know that I'm fine. I know that I'm not shooting blanks or anything. And your friend has refused to come with me to the fertility clinic. If there's a problem, we need to know now so we can find a way to work around it.
Anita shifted in her chair.
Does she know that you got examined?
Jayola gave Anita a blank stare and she nodded knowingly.
So what are you asking me to do?
divulge her medical history.
She was starting to get defensive.
Just convince her to go to the fertility clinic with me.
He said quickly when he heard footsteps approaching the door.
Please.
He stood up. Moini stopped when she saw Anita and Jayola. Jayola grabbed 2 more cans from the fridge, walked towards his wife and kissed her on the mouth before making his way out past her. She narrowed her eyes just enough for Anita to see the question dancing around them.
He suspects you're hiding something, no?
She ignored the piercing look her friend was sending her way.
He thinks you have reproductive issues.
Moini continued to fix her gaze on Anita with her back resting on the door of the kitchen.
What is it? What? You think I came to do your husband in your kitchen on his birthday? Give me some credit, please. And don't annoy me today, I beg. It's been years, since you found out about our irrelevant history together. Get over it already. I don't want your husband, please.
She was now almost shouting. Moini's mouth was open, but nothing came out of it. Agreed, she was still uncomfortable with seeing Jayola and Anita together, but she had every right to be. She had learned that one can never be too careful. After all, she knew her friend's history with men, and in particular with her husband. And no matter how distant that part of Anita might seem now, it lurked in the back of her mind like a criminal in shadow. She smiled and she spread her legs to prevent Anita from opening the door.
Hey, guilty conscience.
She tickled Anita at the side of her abdomen.
Did I say anything? Smile, Joe.
She continued to tickle her until Anita gave in to laughter.
As I was saying, just go with him to the clinic. You don't want your marriage to end over this issue. I mean, it's bad enough that you're going behind his back to get a job when you know he doesn't want you to work.
Moini stepped away from the door and tapped her stiletto nails on the kitchen slab.
Who said I don't want my marriage to end?
If I hear. My dear, trust me. You don't want to join me where I am right now. I'm telling you that you don't want your marriage to end. It's not a big deal. Just go with him.
And the IUD?
Moini whispered in Anita's face for fear that if she spoke any louder, the walls would relay her words to the wrong ears. She pulled out a pair of slippers from behind the kitchen door.
That's not a big deal now. We'll take it out just before you go and put it back in soon after. Easy as. He won't find out if you don't want him to. Don't worry.
Anita took Moini's hand and dragged her behind her.
This thing you're doing though, well, we have guests. Let's go. We'll talk about this later.
Moini tapped her feet uncontrollably as she watched Jayola hug the woman goodbye again. She had not seen her face the first time, but she was positive it was the same woman from the week before. The woman waved in her direction before turning to walk towards the gate behind the man she came with.
Jay, who was that?
She asked Jayola before he was close enough for her to hear him whisper.
Oh, the college IAs. I wanted you to meet them, but you were everywhere.
He replied when he reached her, grabbing her hand and spinning her around.
I love you, sugar.
He cooed as he tried to kiss her.
Jay, stop. You know people are still around, right?
She heard a familiar voice beside them as she struggled to free herself from his grasp.
Zino.
He extends his hand for a friendly handshake.
Whoa.
He said, turning to his confused wife.
This is my new right-hand man I was telling you about the other day.
I'm sorry, who?
Moini struggled to stop herself from losing her balance. She reached for her husband's hand and held it for support as she felt a sudden migraine hit her at that moment. What were the odds?
My new vice.
Placing his arm around her shoulders and drawing her close to his side.
Zino writes. Very smart guy. He's the one that's been helping me close all the new deals in Abuja and Port Harcourt this quarter.
She felt her husband's arm slide to her lower back. Zino smiled at her and stretched his hand towards her. She looked at it and smiled nervously.
Oh, it's very nice to finally meet you, Mr. Wright.
Thanks for listening to Aso Ebi, the podcast. Brought to you by The Naked Convos. Produced by 808 Extra. Theme song, Charles Onwubia, aka Beethoven. Narrated by Feifei. Voice actors, Iloise Omoimi as Jeddah, Eniola Keshiro as Moini, Iloise Omoimi as Zino, Jasper Tomomewo as Jayola, Jojo Amiegbe as Dr. Anita. This podcast is available everywhere you listen to podcasts on. Don't forget to subscribe and share.